I'm sure that you've watched a movie before at some point. Chances are you've watched more than just one. Maybe 5, 10, 15, 25, or even more. Either way, almost everyone has a movie that they've watched and enjoyed. But have you ever taken the time to think about what went into the film industry and why your favorite movie might exist? So let's start off with the broad history of film and simply the technological advancements that made our current movies possible. The first photograph ever was taken nearly 200 years ago, in 1826, but the first moving picture was actually produced not as long after as you might expect. The Lumiere brothers had already released a commercial motion picture titled Arrival of a Train in Paris, 1895, about 70 years after the very first photograph was taken. The Lumiere brothers created this film using an invention of their own, and arguably the first video camera, named the Lumiere cinematograph. The camera worked by shining light through a translucent film. A hand crank on the side of the machine was used to rotate the film, which when done correctly would change the image being projected just fast enough to look like it was a moving image. From there we saw the first notable films, such as A Trip to the Moon, which had already been released in 1902, but was already significantly more advanced than the original Arrival of a Train. Following years, the base of film industry started to form, and just a decade later, film had already become commonplace for people around the world as a form of entertainment, art, and technology. In 1908, Kinemacolor was invented, which was the first form of film that could be seen in color. Instead of shining light through a regular film, Kinemacolor used external red and green filters, which could give the usual black and white camera shots a few shades of color. But the large advancements came with the invention of Technicolor, a process which affected/added color to film as it was shot rather than being added after to a black and white image. Technicolor's first forms can be dated back to 1916, but we didn't see its full form in commercial use until The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Nowadays, most films are shot on video cameras, which use a significantly more complex process that involves light being reflected into a small point, and then a small sensor is able to save the formation of light digitally. Now getting more regional, and starting off with the largest and most famous film industry, we have North America. It was here that we saw some of the most iconic films and movie makers of all time, but also the pop culture influence that took place here through the likes of the Hollywood industry, as well as the origins of movie studios like Disney, Warner Brothers, and many more. In 1937, Walt Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This was Disney's first ever full-length animated film, and started the wave of animated films and television all around the world. The 2D animation in this film was created by individually drawn pictures, which were then pieced together at a certain frame rate. Nowadays, most Disney films are animated in 3D animation programs and also use CGI, but Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the starting point for all of those. Just 2 years later, we saw The Wizard of Oz released to the public, and this was another equally groundbreaking film. The Wizard of Oz was one of the first feature films to be made using the previously talked about Technicolor. The Wizard of Oz opened a whole new world in the film industry for every single movie, showing how color can affect things like set design, costumes, makeup, pretty much anything. And again, just 2 years after that, Orson Welles showed Citizen Kane, which generally went under the radar for a while since the main character was based on the celebrity figure William Randolph Hearst, who did his best to keep the film from being a public hit. Once the film was shown in the years to come at film schools, it really took off. The cinematography was revolutionary for its time and used unique camera angles and positions to tell the story. Just like in North America, film in Europe was an instant hit, and some of the first movies ever produced to date were from Western Europe. While their scene may not have been as defined as North America's was at the time, it would be a vast understatement to say they didn't have an impact on the film world. Some of the most influential filmmakers ever were from the Great British Kingdom, particularly Charlie Chaplin, who is named as arguably the most important filmmaker of all time, and Alfred Hitchcock, who is also referred to as the father of modern cinema. Europe's film scene slowed down during the early to mid-1900s because of the two world wars, but it came back and quickly made its appearance in the industry. Some notable films to come out of Europe it can include The 400 Blows, Lawrence of Arabia, and an Italian film called 8½. The 400 Blows was notable in film history because it was one of the first autobiographical films and one of the first commercial films to be created without the help of a studio. Lawrence of Arabia is one of the most famous films of all time and is just flat out visually stunning, with even the likes of Steven Spielberg saying that it is what got him into filmmaking. 8½ was one of the most widespread Italian films of its era and was filmed without audio, which they dubbed in later, which was common for Italian films at the time. The movie is heavily praised for its intricate costume and set design, which was sometimes overlooked in the earlier film world. Film in Asia has a longer history than you might expect. A 5,200-year-old bowl was found in Iran that had paintings of a goat on the side of it, which experts think was an attempt at an early form of animation. Shadow plays were also common in ancient China, so the idea was always there, they just never had the technology. The rise of new cameras and new technology at the end of the 1800s, however, allowed Asian filmmakers to start their careers. A lot of silent films throughout Asia, especially in India, started being created. Once films with sound were possible, Asia once again started to pursue the craft. In the 1930s, Japan's film industry started to boom, with multiple rising filmmakers, a couple being Yasujiro Ozu and after World War II, Akira Kurosawa. Asia also created some of the most iconic films ever, like Godzilla and Enter the Dragon, which both ended up being major pop culture icons. Two other movies that came out of Asia were Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker and the Japanese animated film Akira. Stalker is a long and slow-paced movie with a lot of dialogue, but the cinematography is very captivating. The movie is very unique and philosophical, and it's a very simple movie, yet there also seems to be a million different ways that you can interpret it. Regarded as one of the greatest animated movies ever, Akira used some of the most meticulous and detailed animation out of any movie at the time, and probably even now. Its massive range of colors and the animator's understanding of motion and movement influenced film and TV animation all over the world. The film world has thousands of different stories, directors, writers, and really anything that is involved in the movie making process that has affected the outcome of today's scene. I wanted to cover some of the things throughout film history that I thought had an impact on what we see today and what I thought was interesting. I encourage you to find out what you like in movies and explore that particular aspect to find out how it came to be.